بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وآله وصحبه ومن والاه. Inshallah, everyone is doing well, staying safe, enjoying these last 10 days and 10 nights of Ramadan. Every year on May the 8th, we as Westerners celebrate VE Day, which was the end of the beginning of the end of World War II, Victory in Europe Day, which signifies and commemorates the Allied victory over the Nazi forces. It's very appropriate that the last couple of years, this year, and most likely next year, will be times in which VE Day will fall in the month of Ramadan. Most likely next year, it will be the last year for a long time in which this day will fall within the month of Ramadan. You might find it strange that I would begin this way or talk about this, but one of the reasons I wanted to do this is the name itself, or the day itself, is victory. It's a day in which victory is celebrated. When Winston Churchill took office and began his country's assault and push against Nazi Germany, he said that what he was after, the goal that he sought, was a total victory. And he said, and as he would repeat throughout the war, without victory, there can be no survival. Victory is something that is so important. It is something that is so necessary that it is at times like these that we celebrate and commemorate those moments in time in which we have had victory, in this case over dark and evil forces, but not just threatened Europe at the time, but in a way threatened the entirety of Western civilization as we know it in the modern world. And it is befitting that we discuss victory in the month of Ramadan, because Ramadan itself is a month of victory. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was the Battle of Badr, which was the first major military engagement between the Prophet ﷺ and Quraysh, and it was the first battle of Islam, and it is a battle that we commemorate in the month of Ramadan, and we've spoken about it in some of our nightly sessions. Many of the verses in the Quran are dedicated to talking about the Battle of Badr. And the companions, the 313 companions that fought in the Battle of Badr, also have a special category inside the category of the companions. However, sometimes we forget that also the conquest of Mecca at the end of the Prophet's life, ﷺ, also took place in the month of Ramadan. And Surah Al-Fath, the chapter of Fath, is largely dedicated to narrating the events of that episode. There is a tradition that we have. It's not necessarily a tradition linked to a specific hadith, but it's a tradition amongst the learned people that on the eve of the first of Ramadan, that they begin, like tomorrow is the first day of fasting, and so tonight we begin our entry into the month of Ramadan by reciting Surah Al-Fath. And the reason we do that is multifold, but to commemorate and to acknowledge that this is the month of victory, that this is the month of winning. However, outside of the Prophet's life, ﷺ, there were also major battles that were fought and won by Muslim forces in the month of Ramadan, like the Battle of Yarmouk, which was the defeat of the Persian Empire, the opening of Morocco or West Africa, Al-Maghrib in general, the opening of Al-Andalus, and also some of the major battles of the Crusades in which the Muslim forces were victorious. And then the list goes on and on and on throughout Islamic history. I mean, these are just some of the famous ones, or some of the ones that are more known. There are also smaller ones all the way up until the modern world. So this idea of victory, VE Day, falling in the month of Ramadan, and also from our own history, acknowledging that many of these, our own victories from our own history, also took place in the month of Ramadan, is appropriate. Because as Churchill said, without victory, there can be no survival. That sometimes it is necessary for that struggle, it is necessary for that conflict, hoping out of that conflict to resolve the conflict and to emerge victorious. However, in our lifetime, in our situation, our struggles are different than those of the ones in the past. And in the month of Ramadan, it's an opportunity for us to go from the outside and to reflect inwardly. So while there is this historic narrative that Ramadan is a month of victory and that there were all of these famous military campaigns and battles that were won in the month of Ramadan, that's not necessarily what we think about when we're fasting, but rather we reflect inward and we think of the struggle and the conflict that is in with us. And therefore, by beginning the month by reciting Surah Al-Fath, by reflecting on this concept of victory, we think of victory over our own selves. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ said is the greater jihad, al-jihad al-akbar, because it is your own self that is always with you, each one of us, that we must struggle against and we must overcome. And the institution of fasting has been given to us largely to help us understand and acknowledge, first and foremost, yes, I have this struggle, I have this problem with me against myself, and I have this tool in this month of Ramadan, this tool of fasting that brings about reflection, that brings about sort of blocking a little bit of the intake of the from the senses and from food and from drink, and therefore allowing the soul and the self to nourish itself while the body starves for just a few hours. I have this tool that allows me to acknowledge, yes, I have this internal struggle. And more importantly, I have the tools and I have the capability to overcome the struggle. I have this ability to have this victory, because victory over ourselves is something that we should all seek, because without that victory, there can be no survival. Without us overcoming our base desires, without us overcoming our nafs, without us overcoming, those whispers that we have that want to take us off the course, without overcoming that, we are not going to be able to live, we are not going to be able to survive, and we are not going to be able to thrive. And in one way, shape, or form, I have stated something similar to this elsewhere, and you're probably all familiar with me saying this. Yet, in this Ramadan specifically, in 2020, we are facing something that we have never faced before, which is we are, first of all, meeting like this online, not able to congregate in the mosque, not able really to pray Taraweeh as a group, not able to pray Jummah at all because we are not in the mosque. And we are all quarantined at home, or some form of quarantine and self-isolation because of the current pandemic. And the reason why I've been thinking about VE, I never really mentioned this, like the last year or the year before that or the year before that, even though I, acknowledge that this is an important day and there's this association with victory and whatnot. But the reason I mention it, and I begin with it this way, this year specifically, is we are struggling against something out there that is not just, this Ramadan is not just a month of self-reflection. It's not just a month of thinking of our lower self and these type of things, but it is a month in which there is a real struggle that is unmatched with our other Ramadans. And it is the struggle with this virus that is out there that we can't see, that is hidden, that knows no difference between old and young, between brown and white and black and yellow, etc., knows no difference between people's religious belief, their creed, or lack of belief. And then we are all, in a sense, as a global community, struggling with this together. We are struggling with, do we go back to work or not? We are struggling with, what do we do with our children? We are struggling with, what do we do with our own center? Do we open the mosque or not? Even though in our United States context, there is a lot of push by a lot of groups to open, to resume, to go back to normal. I hope that at this point in the month of Ramadan, we have enough sense to pause and to ask ourselves, what is normal in the first place? When people say they want to go back to life the way it was, is life the way it was 2-3 months ago the kind of life that we want? One of the things that I have noticed throughout this pandemic is that we are able to live with ourselves, or we are forced rather to live with ourselves, whether we were prepared for it or not. It's very easy to distract ourselves by work, by entertainment, uh, whatever. Some people, they abuse substances, different substances. It doesn't necessarily mean it's haram or it's illicit, but some people abuse food, some people abuse drink, some people abuse caffeine, and yes, some people, they abuse drugs and alcohol, etc. And in a way, that's a call or a cry for help, a cry that we want to drown out our regular life and not face ourselves in the mirror. And this is why speaking about this in the month of Ramadan, when we talk about the struggle against the nafs, this is exactly the struggle against the nafs. In many of the books in Islamic history and Islamic ethicists that talk about this subject matter, they typically begin that the first stage is to wake up, al-yaqadha, to wake up to the things that we're talking about. Because sometimes, or rather most of the times, we're not even aware of it at all. We're not aware that there's the struggle inside ourselves, that we have a lower self, that we might not be doing as well as we think. But we're always rushing to this, rushing to that, hopping from this, hopping to that. I got to do this, I got to do that. I got to put in one more hour here. I got to do one more thing. And we're just rushing and rushing and rushing and rushing. But because of what's happened in the last couple of months, a lot of that has been taken away. Yes, there's the struggle of us being at home, and there's the struggle of the kids in school, and now everything is on Zoom and online and this and that. But at the end of the day, we are facing each other, or we are facing ourselves rather, more directly. So in the last 2 months, we have to reflect, and especially that half of this time has been the month of Ramadan. Allah Alam, God only knows how long it will be in the future, hopefully not too much longer. But I hope that we have reflected on our life before. What is normal? What is our consumption? In many Ramadans, I speak about the issue of consumption, that Ramadan is also for us an opportunity to audit that which we consume, not just consume food and drink, but what we consume information-wise, what we consume entertainment-wise, what we consume socially, etc. The reason I mention this is, as I said in the beginning of the month, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, وَلَنُذِيقَنَّهُم مِّنَ الْعَذَابِ الْأَدْنَى دُونَ الْعَذَابِ الْأَكْبَرِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. Allah ta'ala says we allow them to taste the smaller, the lesser tribulation, rather than the greater tribulation, meaning that we face the tribulation now in this world, before we face the tribulation in the hereafter. Perchance, لَعَلَّهُمْ, maybe, يَرْجِعُونَ, maybe they will come back. When I was in Japan on my first visit, and I met with a Zen master, a Zen priest, he was talking about meditation, and we were exchanging ideas. And I asked him, about the origins of meditation in Zen Buddhism. And he said, the origin of meditation, it comes from this Pali word sati, which means to remember and to return. And then he kept going like this with his hand, to come back. Because in the meditation or in the mindfulness exercise, the idea is to bring the attention back to the self, back to the body. And the reason that stuck with me is that this is exactly, almost verbatim, the same way that Muslim scholars understand the idea of dhikr, is to bring your attention back to yourself, for the secret of that which you seek is within you. And they will even go with it, they will, for example, they will say, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. And that motion sort of stuck with me. And as I read this verse, لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ, maybe, perchance, perhaps they will come back, I think of this necessity of us coming back to ourselves, coming back to our humanity, coming back to our senses, coming back to our ethics, our principles, our values, our shared humanity, coming back to what we know is true, that we are so blessed that we have a system of belief, a system of thinking, a system of worship that we know works, that has answers to these problems and these questions. But the important thing for us is to come back to it, to think, to reflect, and to remember. And the month of Ramadan is one of the greatest times for us to do that. It is this time of introspection, it's this time of reflection, it's this time of contemplation. But I want us to make sure that we are not only contemplating just on the Quran and the fast and the overtly religious aspects of the month of Ramadan, but because this month has also fallen during this really bizarre, unparalleled pandemic, it's very important that we also ask ourselves and we reflect on how our life was before, and ask ourselves, is there a new normal, therefore? Is there a new way of living? I am not saying that the way we were living before got us into this pandemic. The pandemic, we know, is something that is not man-made, is something that mutates, is, a force of nature, and we respect the science behind it, and we use the science, inshallah, to solve the problem. What I'm saying is that because we have been in quarantine, we have seen and reflected, certain sectors of the economy collapse, almost within a week. People out of a job, people struggling seriously, all of these politicized debates about what is the right course of action. Do we open, do we not open, is the curve being flattened, do we wear masks, do we not wear masks? All of these things need, for the believer, is a cause for us to reflect. Not necessarily a cause for us to jump into the fray of those discussions and start fighting and debating with each other. Because the Prophet ﷺ warned us at the time of fitna to stay away from the fitna. Sometimes he says that the tribulation, the fitna, can be blind. Amyat, you don't know what's happening. People don't know what's being told to them. They're not, the whole truth is not being divulged to them. I'm not saying we bury our heads in the sand, but what I'm saying is we definitely need to reflect, self-reflect more than we are engaging in those things. And as things are peeled back, as bans and restrictions are removed and life goes back, quote unquote, to normal, we will be at a tremendous loss if we have not used this time to reflect, because this is why Allah Ta'ala has given us this tribulation, for us to reflect. He has not given us this tribulation to ram through a solution, to ram through a vaccine and just to go back to life as it was, but rather Allah Ta'ala is slowing us down and saying, think about how you're living your life. This is the time to make the right decision, personally, about your life, about your family. And for us as a community, this is the time for us to ask ourselves, are we doing everything that we should be doing in our community? Now, more than anybody, I am very biased towards ICCP, and I love the community and I love all of you. And I say this without anything specific in mind. I'm just saying we should ask ourselves, let us hold ourselves to the highest possible standard. What more should we be doing? What more services should we be offering to one another? How can we make the community thrive more? Are we reaching everyone that needs to be reached? So on and so forth. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ, so that they can come back. Of course, when Allah Ta'ala says that, what He means first and foremost is that we go back to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To Allah we belong and to Him we return. But elsewhere in the Quran, for example, when Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam destroyed all of those idols and he left like the hammer axe with a large idol, the reason he did that is لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. Allah Ta'ala also says he used that farce, Sayyidina Ibrahim used that farce with the people so that they would come back to their senses. So they would realize, of course, the big idol didn't kill or knock down the small idols. We made the idol in the first place. It has no power outside. It's just an inanimate object. So there is, it's appropriate that we think of this coming back to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, but also coming back to our senses, coming back to our reason, coming back to what we know is right. So in a month in which we talk about victory, outward victory that we commemorate throughout our shared history, and in a month in which we commemorate the inner victory, which is the greater victory, the victory of us over our lower self, let us also remember the need to emerge victorious, in the sense that after this pandemic is lessened and removed, inshallah, that we have reflected, that we have taken decisive action to alter certain things in our life and to move down in that direction. Allah Ta'ala tells us that He does not change the condition of a people until we change that which is within ourselves first. We need to take this action. We need to take this decision. We need to make this initiative, and then inshallah we will find the rest easy. We will find the rest will be facilitated for us. And really, this is the biggest lesson especially during this Ramadan, and I can't emphasize it enough, and I'm sorry that this is like the second or third time I've mentioned this in some way, shape, or form. This is really the lesson for us in this month, this Ramadan specifically, is I do not want this opportunity. This is a tremendous opportunity for us to reflect on what's happening around us and to redefine a new normal, and not to be afraid to define a new normal, one that is tied with our ethics, with our first principles, one that is tied in the goodness of humanity, one that is tied in community and in service, inshallah. So please take that seriously. The last thing I want to say, which is more of like a, some public service announcements. These are the last 10 nights of Ramadan. These are the nights in which we seek out Laylatul Qadr. Take that seriously. Push yourself beyond what you pushed yourself before, and know that you have the strength and the capacity to do a little bit extra. And here we're not talking about massive changes, but staying up a little bit later, waking up a little bit earlier, adding a couple of minutes to your dua, maybe making a couple of more rak'ahs, and also equally important, not to forget the importance of all of us collectively supporting our community, supporting the masjid through our charitable giving, which is something that even though it might be difficult for some now, nonetheless is important, because this is the institution that we're all holding on to. It's like our lifesaver, in that sea of confusion out there. This is something that is literally saving our lives, keeping us sane. So let us remember to do it justice, inshallah. I pray that Allah Ta'ala accepts our fast, that He gives us wisdom and self-reflection in this month, that He accepts from us all of our pious deeds, and most importantly, that we seek the ultimate victory and salvation from hellfire, inshallah, by achieving that which we seek to achieve during the month, during the last 10 days, and during Laylatul Qadr. I pray for everyone's success. I will see you soon, inshallah. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.